We are here in Scottsdale, Arizona with a wonderful group of supporters. And I would like to thank all of you who came and who have been part of this and have supported it, because we couldn't have done this without your donations and financial support. And we're hearing the speaker, by the way. We got an echo here. So one of the things that has struck me in the last few years doing this project is that every time we move forward, classified projects try to get ahead. That's happened after Unacknowledged came out, and 650 million people around the world saw that. They then formed an organization called TTSA, which was a cutout for the intelligence community with Luis Elizondo and Chris Mellon and Hal Puthoff and others who have been involved in these classified operations for years, that began to have a controlled leak of information on the subject that went through the mainstream media, and the media covered it because it was authorized by the intelligence community to do so. They do not cover this story unless authorized by the intelligence community in the mainstream media in this country and most others. The result has been that the war narrative, the alien threat narrative, got embedded in every single story in a very subtle and nuanced way. And this is, of course, why we're here. We're here because we knew this was coming. Carol Rosin was told this was coming in 1974. I was read into these plans in the early 90s that they would at some point pivot towards a wild card situation of a threat from outer space to try to unite the world around a very militaristic level of unity, or rather than an enlightened level of unity. And we're at that point. We're at the inflection point. And this is why this is such a very critical time. The good news is that our plans here are to create a documentary that will be released free to the world without a distributor, meaning that you don't have any intellectual property holdback on it. And if people want to put it out in its entirety, anywhere on any site in the world, they will do so, be allowed to do so. And that means every influencer, celebrity, friends you have who are influencers or celebrities, yourself. And this is where we really need your help. We have crowdfunded the project. Now we need to crowdfund or crowdsource the disclosure. Okay, and that's really why I'm very grateful for all of you here, because this isn't going to happen without us, we, the people, doing it. And this is what I learned the very hard way. And I just want to give people a little bit of a tour de force over the last, since 1992 or so. Most people don't know the history of disclosure. The history of the Disclosure Project was an accident or planned by some higher forces, perhaps, as a result of a close encounter of the fifth kind, CE-5 contact, on the beach in Florida in 1992. So we had about 60 people there for a weekend expedition. I was just starting to do this, working as an emergency doctor as my normal life, and in my spare time, leading an interplanetary contact ambassador program. And so we were down there, and there were a couple colonels there and people who were Air Force folks who had come. And first night we're out, it was only a couple nights, it was a weekend. We had 4 extraterrestrial vehicles just pop, 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 materialize in the sky. Now you've all seen the funny video where the southern dude goes, "Holy damn hot shit!" And I said, just calm down, you know, that one. But photographs were taken and ended up on the front page of the Pensacola paper. So within 30 days, I get some calls from people in the intelligence community. So the general who's head of Army intelligence, General Albert Stubblebine III, contacts me. He invites me to a meeting in Atlanta a few days after this contact to meet with him, allegedly for some conference, which was actually a dog and pony show from some intelligence people. And they put me I got there, I thought I was being in the back of the room, and they put me at the head table with the general and some CIA and National Security Agency folks. And that night took me up and to a room in this hotel. And they basically said, well, who the hell do you think you are? And what do you think you're doing, making contact with these civilizations without our permission? And I informed him, I don't need your permission. I'm a free denizen of the earth and the cosmos. I've had contact with these civilizations. I know who they are, why they're here, and you can't deceive me. Moreover, I'm not wealthy, but as a medical doctor, I don't need your damn money. And thirdly, when I was 17, I died, and I'm not afraid of death. Therefore, you have no traction with me. And of course, he was not happy hearing this. He goes like this, we know exactly who this son of a bitch is. I said, yes. So what are you going to do about it? So that was my entree as a doctor who was doing this as a civilian for universal peace and enlightenment and contact, getting dragged into this morass that we call the national security state. So that little, and it was apocryphal, but I just wanted to give you that sort of setting. So then within about a year of then, a month later, the co-founder of the Peace Corps, Dr. Maury Albertson, and an Apollo astronaut and some other folks organized a conference. And before the conference was a weekend retreat at St. Malo's near Estes Park. And so some of these same people show up at this. And of course, they're trying to intercept what we're doing. And at that meeting, again, the general, the head of Army Intelligence, General Albert Stubblebine III, offers me $2 billion, with a B, US dollars, if I would stop what I was doing and join their group and be on the sort of a board, operating board. It was a serious offer, and I said, no, thank you, I cannot be bought. He then went behind my back to my wife, big mistake. And I said, no, we're not gonna do this. And she thought, oh, he was so nice, he was flattering you. And I said, yeah, devil speak with forked tongue. So I'm quarter Cherokee, so I kind of like the Native American view of all of these sort of corrupt people. So what I decided was they're not going to stop, but I'm going to just keep ignoring them. So then I get approached shortly thereafter by some people who were tied into the Clinton administration. And of course, he took office in January of 1993. And what they basically communicated to me was that the president and the CIA director, as well as other members of administration, had made inquiries into the subject and had been denied access, which did not altogether surprise me, but I was a little bit unsure that could be true. I think most Americans or people around the world would think top of the pyramid would be the President of the United States and certainly his senior national security team. Not true. So eventually I was asked to brief the director of the CIA. And I just want to share a couple sentences from the letter from myself. This is one document I think you have. And it's from the head of the Arlington Institute, who was friends with the director of the CIA, R. James Woolsey. And he says, I talked to Woolsey this morning and he suggested getting together over dinner. And then he wrote, there is an active attempt being made at lower levels of government to sabotage Project Starlight, which was the code name for the Disclosure Project before anyone knew about it. This group almost certainly has tapped your phones and is aware of most of the details of your plans. They are feeding information gathered from their collection, like the fact that you might be meeting with Woolsey back in a negative way. And then he says, Operation Starlight will become a serious underlying threat to the status quo. And then he continues, you must understand that great principalities and powers will oppose your plans if they know about them. And then later says, remember, the most powerful people in the world will have a deep, compelling interest in our activities and will use everything in italics at their disposal to affect their objectives. So with that, I went, okay. I mean, I'm an emergency doctor and sort of seen everything. I said, all right, we'll go. Now, at the time, I really thought that this was a ruse, but it wasn't. And in fact, the CIA director had been denied access, as had the president. Subsequently, Lawrence Rockefeller, with whom I had met, hosted the president and first lady, Bill and Hillary Clinton, at the ranch out in Wyoming, where they were subsequently briefed with materials that we had assembled. But ultimately, they signed off and didn't want to proceed. These meetings continued. So once I realized that the national security state was not going to allow the president or the CIA director or a lot of his senior team to have control over this, we ended up having a really serious problem with figuring out, well, then what are they going to do? So I started putting together a team early on of whistleblowers, people in the government who knew about this. And this continued, for a number of years behind the scenes. The public knew very little about it because I was trying to keep it confidential, because otherwise they wouldn't have taken a meeting. In 1997, most people don't realize that we conducted a briefing for members of Congress, where Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, and about a dozen of the first top secret military and intelligence CIA people were gathered to do a private briefing for members of Congress, including chairmen of committees and what have you. But it was private. It was not up on the hill in a SCIF, a secure communication intelligence facility. It was at a private setting in Georgetown. So when we did that event, there was a man, and he had been on an interagency committee in 1974, interesting year, same year that Wehner von Braun shared with Carol Rosin. And he said, look, I have been on this committee, and back at that time, I remember this is 97, almost 25 years later, we could push a button and an algorithm would kick in where there would be a staged alien attack on the Earth that we are doing, and that everyone from the president to the National Military Command Center personnel and most of the joint staff would not know it's not alien. They would think it's ET, and it isn't. Now, I had heard similar stories from people who had been in these operations before, and that's when I realized that this was actually the heart of what they were, one of the reasons for the secrecy. The technologies that they're hiding is one reason, because that's an $800 or $900 trillion issue with oil and gas and coal and everything else that's destroying the planet. But this was actually bigger, because this is how eventually they could unite the world, not in peace, but in war. And not in enlightenment, but in fear. And so this is when I realized we have a very big problem. I never knew that I would step into this arena. Ultimately then, right after that, I briefed Admiral Tom Wilson. And that's another, I don't know if you're keeping up with the documents, but I've been going through some of them. And Admiral Wilson was the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was somebody who really did not know about this issue. He'd asked about it. We provided briefing to him written before I met with him. And remember, this is J2, head of intelligence joint staff, sort of second in line after the head of it, the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who I later briefed. And he said no, in his inquiries on this, he was denied access completely and was actually threatened with demotion. So that is a huge problem. And I said, well, you're not the only person who's run into this lead wall. He said, well, who else? I said, well, CIA director, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee I've met with, the Secretary of Defense, Gordon Cooper, who was an astronaut, whose team filmed an object landing out on a dry lake bed back in the 50s, was asked by Secretary of Defense Cohen for Bill Clinton to get him all that information so he could get the original footage out of the vault or the classified projects. Gordon Cooper did so because he and I were given a talk to an organization in Washington. And he shared me this story. And the Secretary of Defense was completely unable to extract anything on this subject, including having all the actual intelligence on that case from an astronaut whose team filmed it, he could not get it. And this is the Secretary of Defense of the United States. So between 1992 and 1997, I knew we had a massive, unparalleled constitutional crisis. Forget Watergate and little scandals like that, or the Monica Lewinsky scandal. This is the biggest one in the history of the United States, period. Nothing comes remotely close. And so it began. And at a certain point, I realized that the politicians simply were not going to do anything about it. And for that reason, we decided to do it ourselves. So in 1997, under the guidance of discussions with constitutional attorney, who I wish to introduce for a moment, Daniel Sheehan, and my military advisors, I did an unless otherwise directed letter. What does this mean? It means this is a military strategy where you can write to your commander or to the head of an agency and say, this is my assessment of this situation. This is what we are going to do about it, unless otherwise directed, UNOD. So we did that, went to the heads of the FBI, NSA, CIA, the whole alphabet soup, everyone. Return receipt requested, I can prove it happened. And I said, you have until the end of January 1998 to inform us that we are not correct. And unless you do, we are going to proceed as follows. The projects that are dealing with this issue are unacknowledged special access projects and are being run illegally and unconstitutionally. Therefore, we are going to authorize and enlist the help of people who have top secret clearances to hand off to us documents, information, schematics, testimony, what have you. And they cannot be prosecuted under the National Security Act because that would require that that project be within the bounds of the law, and we can prove that they are not. We can prove in a court that key people in the United States government who should know and have a need to know have been denied access. And no one, as of this date, April 25th, 2021, has ever contacted me or anyone who's given me a classified document that is not declassified that I have published, or any of our now 980 or so military and intelligence and corporate witnesses. No one's been contacted and said, be quiet or you're in trouble. Not one. And if they were to do so, Daniel Sheehan and myself and a couple other constitutional attorneys would go after them seriously in a major federal lawsuit and case to protect whistleblowers, which is what they are. Because they are not exposing, like Snowden did, projects however ill-founded and ill-advised that were snooping on us like PRISM, but we're being overseen by the president and the oversight committees. They're exposing projects that we can prove have lied to presidents, have been completely done off the books, black projects, unacknowledged special access projects, meaning those who are in them don't tell anyone about them unless that person has been read into it and agrees to keep it secret from even their commanding officer. So that is how that happened. Then it took us from 1998 to about 2000 to assemble who we wanted to have, and then in 2001 had the National Press Conference for the Disclosure Project, which launched the whole modern disclosure movement. Now, that eventually was seen by 800-900 million people, but the day of the event, for the first hour, we had my security people watching that building overnight. There were people in the building putting devices, so everything out of the National Press Club building for the first hour was jammed by the National Security Agency. That's a true story. Hopefully we're not being jammed. Is this still working? We're good? Okay. So that is just a quick overview of this. And I think that the reason this Cosmic Hoax documentary is so important is that it's a singular focus on this very important warning that many, many, many people in the intelligence services in Pentagon have told me about, this plan to stage a threat. And now you and I, all of us, are living through an era where that is literally happening before our very eyes. It's literally happening. If you look at the spin of the stories coming out of the mainstream media, first of all, there are two massive lies in every single story in the mainstream media. Number one, that these objects are a threat to the national security. They are not. Everybody knows it. Even the people who are saying it, like Luis Elizondo has admitted, they know that. Number two, that we don't know how they operate, that we have no idea how these could be going faster than the speed of sound and not making a sonic boom. Never mind, I have met with multiple aerospace engineers at various aerospace companies and also who've worked for the intelligence services who helped design and have worked on these systems since the 50s, 60s, 80s. So you have, that's not only a lie, but a damn lie. Now, I'm not saying that Senator Marco Rubio or former Trump National Security and Director of National Intelligence head Ratcliffe are knowingly lying, but they're reading from a script. Okay, I don't know what they know and don't know. I do know that what they're saying to you, the American people and the world, is false. It's completely and provably false. And that's what we shall prove today and in the course of this documentary and over the next 2 months. Because the public needs to know the reason for the holdback on acknowledging that we would have anything that could behave the way the Tic Tac, that video, that was all in the news a couple years ago, and the new ones that are coming out from the naval destroyers, which are these triangular objects over our Navy. The Pentagon a week or two ago said, yeah, those are real. They didn't say those are ours. Those were made by our aerospace and clandestine operations and engineering operations. So they want people to think that our Navy destroyers are being harassed by these things. No, it's because the captain of that Navy ship and the pilots who were chasing these Tic Tacs and other craft off the coast of California, they weren't read into the existence of these technologies that are in unacknowledged special access projects. That's how secret it is. The captain of a naval destroyer would not have clearance for that. Certainly, if the CIA director was not read into it, why would a captain on a Navy ship? So this is where secrecy is dangerous, because in the darkness of that secrecy, these people can unroll a program that would trick everyone, a false flag. And it's happened before, and we'll get into that later. But I just wanted to give you this big picture before we welcome our first guest from Russia. Oh, and we're not. Okay, well, we seem to have a technical problem. We have a cosmonaut who is supposed to be there, but we will then proceed with another part of the program. I think we can have, is Carol Rosin ready? When you guys get Timothy, Carol, can you start now? Because she's next, and I'll introduce her. We have a cosmonaut who is supposed to click in at 1:15 to 1:20, and I've been waiting for the signal, but apparently he's not online. Hopefully we'll get him online soon. But first, then, I would like to introduce a dear friend, beautiful soul. Oh, Carol, I see you left. Oh, she's trying to get him. And let me just give you a little background on Carol. A neighbor of ours had told me about Carol Rosin. And she knew of her because she had read an article about her in a magazine and said, you really need to talk to Carol Rosin. I said, who's that? And so we reached out, and she, of course, had been the spokeswoman for Wehner von Braun, who invented the rocket for the Germans in World War II, the father of rocketry, later was foundational in our aerospace programs here in the United States. And he told her, well, he was very sick, last few years of his life or so, in 1974 and onward, about what would happen. and that it was Carol Rosin's sacred task to prevent and keep weapons from space, because space we must share with our cosmic cultures and neighbors. And this was his heartfelt request and his dying request to Carol. And she's been faithful to that for now, 47 years. So I'd like to introduce Carol Rosin, my dear friend.
This is possibly the last presentation I'm ever going to give, because I think there's nothing more that needs to be said after this event. In terms of pivoting the course of history, there are so many issues of concern that we all have. For me, as an educator, I was concerned about the orphans on the planet. At that time, I heard there were 30,000, and I have no problem, we'll get them homes. Now I hear there are 400 million orphans. And I hear 100 to 200 species a day are disappearing, and you know all the problems of the earth changes and the climate and the disease and the issues that all of us have personally as we're trying to survive and enjoy our lives. It's pretty hard. My husband, John Cypher, I proposed to 3 days after I met him because I was looking for an actor to give my speeches for me. Now he's written a book called If You're Not Depressed, You Ought to Be in Therapy. So it's a kind of a comedy because it's 99 limericks, but it's prose, and it addresses all of these issues. And that's where my heart is, in the issues. But I came here today after quitting about 5 years ago because of Stephen Greer. I think he is a world champion. What he has put together over the years gets to this point where we have a choice that can be made is astonishing. He's courageous. He's discredited. He's challenged. He's got all kinds of things that go against what he's doing, including, I hope we get our link to the Russian connection. They were shut down from YouTube just a few days ago, and they got back up. We've all had our challenges to get this issue out. So I really honor the people who are listening today and who are really paying attention to what Stephen Greer has put together, because this is going to be a fact-based presentation, not only today, but in the film that he's producing, in the courses that he's getting ready to teach, in the writings that all of us are going to be doing as we're all aging, and this travel thing has been very difficult during COVID and all the excuses that we have to be playing in the masquerade. We have a chance now to remove that mask. That's what the lies are. When I met Wehner von Braun in 1974, this is who's known as the father of rocketry in this country. He escaped from Germany from Peenemünde. He was also discredited. He worked with prisoners, never worked with prisoners. There are all kinds of things that happened to the German scientists who really were good people. They were rocket scientists, space cadets. They just wanted to go into space. And in Germany, they could only work with technical people, but it was all being geared to the war machine. So they get out of Germany. Some go to Russia, some come here. I was very lucky. I didn't know it. I was teaching 6th grade. I thought I was going on planning a field trip for my students when I met von Braun. And a few hours later, after he explained to me that he was dying of cancer and that he thought it would be funny if a woman in a miniskirt would come in and start talking about space-based weapons and why they shouldn't happen and why we needed to put a lid on the war machine before it escalated into space, because if it does, we can't picket, we can't protest. This would be a disaster. Imagine, as President Putin says, having nukes hanging over your head and weapons of all kinds. Of course, we're not supposed to know that we could be friends with Russia. And von Braun said, you need to go to Russia, you need to go to China. I did, because we need to be friends. We can't keep identifying one enemy after another, that leapfrog game that we do. They may have weapons, so we have to have weapons. Well, ours have to be better, but they're gonna have to think that ours are better, so we better be better than the ones they think we have. This goes on and on. This is ridiculous. It's a child's game. and all of our lives are at stake. From any one of a number of what Dr. Guy McPherson, abrupt climate scientist expert who has 61 feedback loops, Guy McPherson, that he says could wipe us out in a minute, in an instant. 61. I had a little radio show until I quit 5 years ago from American Freedom Radio, donated to me, and I interviewed him once and then again and then again. And oh my God, this is for real. These are, he said to me just 2 nights ago, tell everybody to look at the methane map on the planet. When's the last time you heard people talking about methane? We see it from space. We need these satellites. But guess what? They're putting thousands and thousands of satellites up. And are they doing it with consciousness? Maybe for the PR campaigns. No. I called Elon Musk's office. I talked to the president of his company, then I talked to his lawyer. It was a lot of fun. He actually had a great sense of humor. And he said, oh, he's not going to talk about peace in space, peaceful uses of space technology. No, no, no. He has confused children to deal with and a divorce, and now he's going to have companies, many companies, and where his contract's going to come from. So a lot of people who are good people, but they count on the contracts. And Wehner von Braun taught me all of this. And he was dying of cancer. And he said, if you don't get a ban on space-based weapons, the pivot can't take place to peace. You cannot have peace on the planet if you have weapons hanging over your heads, aiming down at us and up. Well, what are they going to aim it up for? Are they really going to shut off our communication? That I know some of the people listening today, you have had experiences perhaps with real contact, they call it, with ETs coming in and having a conversation with you. I've never gone public with this before, especially in an audience like this, other than a little handful of people maybe, that I have been in contact. I have had extraterrestrial beings walk through my wall. And as my husband, the actor, retired, says, make sure they know it's not Spielberg. So it's real. Now, are we taken seriously when we say that? No. And because I work from the military-industrial complex view, that's what I came out of. So I became a corporate manager, thanks to von Braun, of an aerospace defense company. When he died 4 years later, 3.5 years later, I became a consultant, a military consultant. Excuse me, I'm allergic to the planet. And I think right now, I have to get a grip on the fact that when I came out of the aerospace defense industry, I realized that there's an accelerated movement going on to weaponize space. Space is already militarized. So if you're talking about stopping the militarization of space, it's too late, guess what? But in space, the military is different. So we have a way to communicate with the military. And I know it works if you say we're opposed to the weaponization, because most of the people I've met in the military are too, most. There's always the handful, as my husband says, that likes blood and guts. They watch those movies. But no, we don't want to protest the military because it's not going to work. They're well funded, they're huge, they're really, really nice. I've gone to some military balls. I like those people. I love a lot of the military friends of mine. I'm an honorary Marine from Commandant Al Gray for work I did with General Joe Hoare, who took Schwarzkopf's place. I was a consultant and got to go into a meeting where I was the civilian who said, how many of you have been to the countries that you're studying? 500 people, 3 people raised their hands. Well, where do you learn about the country that you're going to be in as military reps? Books, movies, lectures. Oh, that's nice. So I want to encourage people listening to go to the countries, go. I've been to Russia over 35 times, China. I've traveled. You meet people from all over the world in these meetings. They're not the enemy at all. I'd like to also encourage you to go to a website, peaceinspace.com, peaceinspace.com. On it, you will see a lot of Russians, you know, the enemy. Well, they're not. And so I've gotten to go to very high levels in Russia. I'm very close friends now with Vladimir Ermakov. You'll see him on the website. He's the head of disarmament and arms control. You're going to see a little video clip. This is an amazing clip that you're going to see today from General Leonid Ivashov. General Ivashov sits down in a chair, you're going to see him, not in uniform, retired, saying, there are extraterrestrial beings here and there is no threat. Is this not our major issue here? So Dr. Greer is bringing out the threat that doesn't exist. He's bringing out the treaty that I'm going to tell you a little bit about, the treaty to prevent the placement of weapons in outer space. And guess who initiated it? The Russians and Chinese. Yeah, the enemy. So we're not supposed to know about the goodness over there. You're going to see a whole lot of these. Just scan the news section and there are a lot of pictures with people from Russia, high level, saying the same thing. We've got to get a binding world treaty. It's verifiable because we're only cooperating in space right now. It's enforceable based on the cooperation. Get the treaty, support it, do what you can, educate people about this treaty. It's posted on that peaceinspace.com website. And let's get that treaty signed. But I mean fast, because the accelerated process is not just a basing weapons in space, it's the extinction process. And I know a lot of people want to deny or not know about the extinction process and the 61 feedback loops, but guess what? It's serious. And I followed Guy McPherson for 30 some years. This research is mind-boggling. And I don't want to come from fear on it. What I want to come from is solutions. Because imagine when we do this breakthrough that Stephen Greer is talking about, so he's talking about the threat that doesn't exist, the treaty that can be signed right now, it's written, there's no compromise on it, it's been approved. We have over 100 countries, close to 125 countries who have agreed to not be the first to place weapons in space on celestial bodies or crafts. This is very important because you're going to hear, oh, there are already weapons in space. Yeah, right? Yeah, electronics, you can use beams, you can use a grain of sand, anything could be a weapon. But we can actually outlaw, ban space-based weapons on celestial bodies and crafts. And when you read the treaty, you must read the treaty. Some of it's legalese, you'll hear it, but the story is there. And guess what? It's the first document that acknowledges indigenous cultures and cosmos cultures. I mean, wow. You'll see. Now, they can't obviously sign a treaty, indigenous cultures and cosmos cultures, but they're acknowledged in this. And this has been approved by international experts, this treaty. So it doesn't need to be compromised or rewritten. We don't have time for it because the other part of the acceleration is not just about this process to put weapons in space, but the extinction process. Now, I don't think anybody listening to this or listening to the film that's going to be coming out or watching it is going to be uneducated about the problems on the planet. But we need to reach the people who don't know. And if you can't get to them, move on and find the ones who can. So you don't have to write your book on why it's, you have to be in therapy if you're not depressed. The fact of the matter is you have a chance right now to educate people. So what I did was, encouraged by von Braun, I went to Russia. During the time of Andropov, President Andropov in the 83s, Andropov gave me a statement. First of all, I got off the plane and tourists stopped me because women alone from America had never gotten off a plane in Russia. What are you doing here? I said, well, I came to meet with President Andropov and I have this list that I got out of a newspaper of names of Russians. And they said, well, that's not possible. But they took me to a hotel. I got in a taxi cabs, which were just the people driving them at that time. This is a time when you still had brown water in the hotels. I mean, they're still getting out of all the horrible war machines that they had gone through. So someone brought me a statement by Andropov by the time I finished talking with people like Roald Segdeev came to see me because I sound like I'm interested in outer space and he was the head of the Space Research Institute. Yevgeny Velikov came, he was the head of the nuclear program. I met with teams of experts and I said, why do you want to be a communist? Then I found out only 1% of Russians were communists. So I was completely wrong with my education about Russia, completely wrong, so many ways. And they took me out to eat and I said, is this organic? Is this no GMOs? And they said, we have no GMOs in Russia. We're not supposed to know that. Well, do you want world peace? Do you want no weapons in space? Now you're going to look at the peaceinspace.com website and you're going to see many people, but that's only a tiny portion. Because after I started coming back and commuting back and forth to figure out what to do, how can we now educate people about Russia, China, the same thing? And I addressed a lot of audiences. And I never had anybody say to me, we want weapons in space. They did say, but America does. And the allies who need to communicate and stay friends because they want extended business and trade, a seat in NATO, financial assistance, or technology transfer. So they have to be allies. They can't be friends around the world with that viewpoint, or they have a belief system or a perspective or interpretation of what they're hearing. And so they think America is a big enemy. Well, I live here. I'm a flag-waving American. I'm an honorary Marine. I'm the head of now the president of the Peace and Emergency Action Coalition for Earth, who was just given to me to be president of by Commander retired Scott Jones, who used to work for Senator Pell, who was the one who invited me to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee, a woman at that time. And also, I'm also the founder of the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space. I had a 3-story building in Washington. I was testifying before the House and Senate and the President's Commission on Space on this issue. But I didn't communicate with the UFO community at that time, basically because I thought most of them were whacked out of their skulls. I mean, the stories that were coming out, and I couldn't present those stories to the Congress or to my corporate friends. Or as a military strategist that I became, I was the first woman, this woman thing got me into a lot of doors actually, to address the Space Command when they were forming. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines were coming together to form the Space Command. And there I was in Cheyenne Mountain going into the tunnels. Whoa, and there's a war room. I mean, it's like in the movies. But they were really cool. I took my husband, the actor, because I knew he could get into more places than I could, in for a visit. We have a picture when John, my, I thought was very sophisticated husband, got on his knees in the middle of this room and said, so tell me, are there weapons? Are there ETs in space? And they took a picture of him. I have that picture. In the Space Command, as we're going on the tour of Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado Springs, there's my husband on his knee. Oh my God. Well, anyway, this is a chance now we have to use our dramatic forces, our communication skills, use the satellites, use television, use the media, and get what you're going to learn from this event here out to the world, with the emphasis that Dr. Greer is bringing to us, that there is a treaty that can ban all space-based weapons. And I say all because if you start talking about the different weapons that we all know about that we want to ban, it gets confusing and they won't, it's distraction. We want something simple to get done now. That's what this treaty that you're going to read will tell you about. And we know a lot of alternative technology. Stephen's a master of this. Alternative energy, how does this come out of this program of reverse engineered? You'll hear about that today too. These are technologies that are available. You're gonna see drawings of it. You're gonna hear different perspectives of it, but the perspectives that are going out right now are perspectives, interpretations, belief systems. They're biblical. I mean, do I need to go into that one for you? I hope not, because we have to create our own narrative now. We have a narrative that's going to come out of this event and what you're going to hear from Dr. Greer in the future and his witnesses. We have a story to tell. It's a new story. We need a new story, a new narrative, but that's based on facts. As Stephen said to me, we want facts. We don't want fiction. We don't want rhetoric anymore. We all know. I'm giving you a lot of rhetoric too, but it's an introduction to this issue from my experience. It's direct. I don't know anyone. The Russians were saying to me before I came here, but you're the only one that ever mentions the treaty. I don't think that's going to happen here. I hope not. I hope you all go back with that one thing we can get done. Get that treaty signed, read it. Read just the headlines, if, by the way, you don't want to go through all the articles that are on that website. There aren't that many. But I wrote the headlines so that they used as talking points. And you know what that did? Just this, we got over 100 countries committed to not being the first to place weapons in space. This is huge. I mean, I'm a 6th grade school teacher. You know, get over it. If you think you can't do something, you can. So find out what that is, follow your guidance, get into what Greer teaches you about meditations, about reaching into a higher consciousness. I'm meeting hundreds of people in Russia. One of the people you're going to see on a little video clip is Professor Alexander Siemenov. I love this guy. He has had 2 meetings a year for 50 years in Russia, where he brings in hundreds of experts from every field. And I met so many of them, and they all have this space bent. So you're going to see another lady, Valentina, on this little video. And she is a lady that's a psychoanalyst. She's also the head of she's the director of the Transformation Consciousness Center. Really?
Before we go to this, could you just share couple things?
Oh, please.
What did Wehner von Braun tell you, which you didn't say? And what did you see when you went to Russia to see Andropov in the underground? And what did you see in the defense long-term strategy?
Stay right here so you can guide me here, because I have all these stories. Okay.
Yeah. So those are 3 key things I'd like for you to share before we break to the videos.
Okay, first, stay here. Wehner von Braun told me that there was going to be a faked alien invasion. And this is really so important. This is why we're here. And he knew. He was in on the meetings. There was no question about it. And that was my first assignment. Let people know that there will be a faked alien invasion. And it's going to be huge. The technology exists to produce it. It's going to be even more. Now, that was back in 74 to 77. Now we can actually see it. Oh, I wanted to tell you this about Andropov too, because he then sent me to Russia. President Andropov, in his time, had a whole slew of videos. And I was taken downstairs into a building. I called it the dungeon because it was so dark, and into a little theater where I saw so many videos. I mean, over an hour's worth of videos of UFO craft. And I was so young and naive at that time that I didn't know what to do with that information. When I got back to the States and tried to tell them in the States, I went to the New York Times office in New York, and I said, could you go to Russia? They would love to get media over here to see all this stuff, and nobody would go to Russia. So it didn't get out. And what was the third thing?
Well, I think it's really important to share what you saw while you were a corporate consultant on this plan. This is a part of which the 4-star general Wesley Clark.
General Wesley Clark, I thank you. I saw on TV. He was on Democracy Now! Where I saw him. General Wesley Clark was talking about something that he saw when he went into a defense office, that were 7 countries against whom we were going to have a war. 7 countries. Now, you know them. We've already had them. Iraq, Iran, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Sudan. There were 7 of them, but I called him from Moscow the last time I was there, which was in 2019. I had his phone number. One of his friends had given me his home phone number, and Wesley Clark answered the phone. And I said, I'm Carol Rosin, and I'm Wehner von Braun's former spokesperson. And now I'm here in Russia giving speeches at the Association Ecology of the Unknown, which is Alex Siemenov founded that, and also working with General Ivashov, who founded the Academy of Geopolitical Problems. And he said, oh, what do you want? And I said, well, I want to comment from you. I want to have a conversation, because you presented this list of 7 countries, but I have a whole long list that made me quit my job at Fairchild Industries, because they were on the wall of the countries against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. A whole list of them, longer, twice as long as his. One of the countries was Yemen. If you're looking at Yemen right now and the starving, suffering, sick children, how long has that been going on? Well, that was on the list. That's the one that made me quit my cushy corporate job and give up my Thunderbird car and all the things that go in the perks of an aerospace defense job. I quit in that very room. And I stood up in the room and said, what is this list? And they said, well, this we're preparing, and this is the theme. The theme of the defense industry, we have to prepare for war, prepare to fight and win. If you haven't seen the Vision 2020, I have it on my website. It's been taken down, but it's from years ago. It's the Air Force viewpoint for lay people, and almost every page says domination and control. The United States has to dominate and control. We have access to space. We give permission if you want to go into space. One of the reasons the allies need to be in cahoots here. Well, now we have this list that has actually occurred. If you go back, and I've had many people say, oh, Carol Rosin, she was right. Well, I don't want to be right. What I want is for somebody to wake up. And I have one last thing about this to say. After that list that I realize now has all happened, all these wars have happened. Now we know what's going to happen in space with the faked alien invasion. We know that we have technologies that can solve enormous problems, which Stephen and the speakers know about, that they'll tell you. But are we just going to know it? I think back to a show that John did on Broadway, my husband, 1776, where he played Thomas Jefferson. And I remember one of the themes of it was, does anybody care? Does anybody see what I see? Does anybody hear? Does anybody see? Does anybody care? Does anybody see what I see? That's why you're here. That's why you're listening. You've got to pay attention to this. You've got to look at that website. On the introduction, one more thing about that. The introduction of that website, if you read it down to the bottom, there's a link to the organization, Association Ecology of the Unknown, which I'm honored to be representing here from Moscow. Imagine me on a board in Moscow. This organization has this website up that has launched 700 videos. That's why YouTube shut them down recently, but they got back on. Not all UFO ET. There are a lot of speakers like us, speakers from the Ziegel's readings that Professor Alexander Siemenov puts together, and some of the video clips that we've collected here. We won't have time to show them all. The ones we can't show, I will post on Peace and Space, but they're also on the website link that's at the bottom of the introduction of that website.
Соединенные Штаты Америки запускают сейчас, казалось бы, фантастическую программу. Казалось бы, что это некая иллюзия, фантастика, не имеющая реального отношения к безопасности нашей планеты и всего человечества. Но я полагаю, исходя из своего военного опыта, жизненного опыта, и исходя из реализации программы «Звездных войн», которую проводили Соединенные Штаты, я вижу, что здесь что эта борьба с инопланетянами и летающими тарелками – это всего лишь легенда прикрытия. На самом деле запускается огромная программа особого доступа, которую даже президентам и Конгрессу не имеют права докладывать. Это программа вторжения, опасного вторжения в космическую среду. Более 30 программ особого доступа запускаются и финансируются Соединенными Штатами для вторжения в космос. Почему я полагаю, что это угроза, может быть, сегодня самая важная, самая главная угроза жизни человечества? Потому что, во-первых, космос – это живая среда, это не некие мертвые пустоты, о которых принято говорить. Но существуют в космосе другие полевые формы жизни, и это доказано и российскими, и иностранными мыслителями, в том числе академиком Вернадским, академиком Казначеевым, Козыревым и другими. Вот. И мы, живущие на планете Земля, являемся частью этой большой живой системы Вселенной. И поэтому любое вторжение в космос, тем более с целью размещения, испытания и применения новых оружий, новых видов оружия массового уничтожения, значительно превосходящий по своей, так сказать, убийственной эффективности ядерное оружие, несет человечеству угрозу уничтожения вообще жизни на планете Земля. Поэтому сегодня нужно космосом заниматься серьезно всему человечеству, всей элите. И тем более не выводить оружие в космос, не создавать оружие, которое было создано в результате реализации программы «Звездных войн», а это оружие климатическое, это оружие информационно-психологическое, когда через космос поражают миллиарды людей, меняют сознание людей. Это оружие, которое способно выключать все программы жизнедеятельности. Так вот, сегодня американцы пытаются создать еще более убийственное оружие и из космоса влиять на все процессы на планете Земля. Это и литосферное оружие, это и всякого рода инфекции, вирусы и так далее и тому подобное. Поэтому мы сегодня, все земляне, должны категорически выступить против, проводить совместные международные исследования, а не закрываться в рамках программ особого доступа, чтобы космос сделать средой нашего обитания безопасным, безопасным, энергию космоса использовать во благо всех людей планеты и всей природы, живой природы Земли. Поэтому нужно поднимать этот голос в защиту безопасности космоса и понимать, что любое вторжение в космическое пространство – это подобно вторжению в систему наших ген человека. Обязательно любое вторжение со злыми намерениями в космос, оно скажется на ситуации планете Земля, на здоровье и выживании человечества, на сохранении жизни всех живых организмов планеты Земля. И при этом нужно учесть, что ни американское государство, ни президент и ни Конгресс осуществляют эти тайные программы, а именно люди, которые находятся в тени. То, что Дональд Трамп, президент Трамп, называл глубинным государством. Это люди, несущие зло человечеству, люди, выступающие за уничтожение более 6 миллиардов населения планеты. И при этом нужно иметь еще в виду, наверняка инопланетяне в той или иной форме и в том или ином образе присутствуют на планете Земля, потому что из миллиардов галактик, по теории даже вероятности, не может организованная разумная жизнь существовать только на планете Земля. Но пока инопланетяне своим присутствием не нанесли никакого ущерба землянам, инфраструктуре и вообще живым организмам на Земле. Поэтому говорить о том, что есть инопланетная угроза, ну, это, наверное, не соответствует реальности. Вот. И если иные инопланетные цивилизации имеют контакты с Землей, то они более нас развиты и образованы, и они понимают, что в любой живой системе, тем более в системе Вселенной, в системе инопланетных цивилизаций, нельзя наносить ущерб другому элементу этой жизни, вот, не разрушая эту систему в целом. Поэтому, пожалуйста, ученые России, да я полагаю всего мира, готовы обсуждать вот проблему инопланетного присутствия иных внеземных цивилизаций. Но сразу закрывать, делать эти программы таинственными и доверять людям, которые не стремятся обеспечить нормальную жизнь и безопасность всей жизни на планете, безусловно, нельзя.
The reason this is so significant is that to have a man of that stature to go on the record, this is very recent, that he came out and made this statement, because he knows that we're pivoting very quickly from this unacknowledged special access group that's a transnational clandestine operation and organization to move us into this last card.